There was a young man sitting alone in a room. He was sitting in a chair next to a lamp, and he was reading his Bible. And suddenly there was a presence that entered the room. The young man's attention was drawn to this presence. He stood up out of his chair and then looked in the direction and noticed that there was a man. The man was extremely bright. As when I say bright, I mean lively. There was a life within him, a spirit, a strength that had never been witnessed. And the man stood before him with his hands closed. The young man did not recognize his face, but he did recognize the authority and knew that he who was before him was greater than he was. He wanted to ask who he was before he could open his lips to say anything. The man opened his hands and said, "My son, you are a very talented and ambitious man, but your love for electronics is greater than your love for me," and closed his hands. The young man began to realize the possibility of who was before him and began to fear greatly. And he responds, "Surely, Lord, you are wrong," and then frantically runs around his room and grabs everything electronic and brings before him his computer, his PlayStation, all his video games, his MP3 players, his DVD players, everything you can imagine, everything that he had, he brought and laid down before him. He says, "Lord, what would you have me do?" The man opens his hands again and says, "My son, you are a very talented and ambitious man, but your love for music is greater than your love for me," and closed his hands. The fear in the young man began to grow even more. "Surely, Lord, you're wrong." Runs around his room and grabbed everything, relayed the music that he could, and brought it before him and laid it down at his feet. He grabbed all of his music, his books, his magazines, his guitar, his trumpet, and everything that he had, everything he owned, everything that he could relate to, he brought and laid down at his feet. He said, "Lord, what would you have me do?" The man opened his hands and said, "My son, you are a very talented and ambitious man, but your love for sport is greater than your love for me," and closed his hands. The young man began to get terrified. Again, ran around his room frantically and grabbed everything related to sport that he could: his basketball, soccer ball, his baseball gear, his boxing gloves, all his workout equipment, his jerseys, his uniforms, everything that he had, and laid it down at his feet and said, "Lord, what would you have me do?" The man opened his hands again and said, "My son, you are a very talented and ambitious man, but your love for the world is greater than your love for me," and closed his hands. The young man had nothing but fear, and again went around his room and grabbed everything that he owned, everything that he ever cared about and cherished and had any of the slightest value. He grabbed all of it, brought it before his feet, and then dropped down to his knees. He said, "Lord, what would you have me do?" The man opened his hands. He said, "My son, you are a very talented and ambitious man. Take all these things before you, go forth and do good things." Closed his hands and then disappeared before the young man could lift his head to look at him one last time. This is a vision that I've had. This is a message that is specific to all those who hear it. God is calling to you, just as He called to me. The Word of God is truth, and the truth will set you free. God bless.